Hi, my name is Damien Mears. I've recently created a very simple Media Center application to let you listen to BBC Radio within Windows Media Center, and I got some requests to publish a source for it. I thought it might be a good idea just to put together a quick screencast showing how I did that, how I created it from scratch, both for people that are interested in seeing how that's done. So I'm assuming you're familiar already with Windows Media Center. Ideally, you've looked at the development environment a little bit for Media Center and the documentation, and you're familiar with C#. So I'm going to fire up Visual Studio now. I'm going to create a new project. I'm assuming that again you've also installed the Windows Media Center SDK. So there are various different kinds of applications. You create a background application, for example, that obviously runs in the background. I want to create a standard Media Center application, and if I select that, then it'll put together a kind of a simple framework application for me. So I'm going to call it MCBeeb, Media Center Beeb. I think that the application I put together is called Beeb MC. So, all right. Now, before I go into the details of actually how I created the Beeb MC application, I'm just going to explain how the existing application that gets built created for you by default, how that works. So when you create a Media Center application like I just did, you get a framework application built for you. I guess the first thing to show is this registration XML file. So this basically tells Media Center about your application, and as we'll see later, it gets registered with Media Center. You can see that it's got various UUIDs identifying the application and the entry point in the application, and then we have the assembly and the class that's being invoked. So the class is my add-in, so that's the class that Media Center is going to load up to run the application, and it has information about the application about the assembly that the class is in. You'll notice it's got this placeholder here for insert your public key token here. We'll come to that in a moment. We've got a description of the application. So let's say listen to BBC Radio. Oops, inside Windows Center. And it has a pointer to the location of the image. And finally, we have the category, and this identifies where you'll actually find it inside the application inside Media Center. You can say you want it to be found in the music menu, for example, or when you right-click or press the info button when you're watching TV, for example. There's all kind of different entry points or places where you can put your application. I'm going to say that mine's going to be simply found under the More Programs menu item in Media Center. So if I go back to the solution now, so as I said, it's invoking this my add-in class. So we'll find that under the code. There are various different application folders that get created by default. Code, where obviously you find code. Markup, where you'll find the Media Center markup, and then we have an images folder where we just have the application image, one that's being referenced here in the image URL. So I'm going to go to the code first. We'll see that in the launch class or launch folder, we have the launch file, we have a my add-in class. This is the class that's getting invoked, and there's various different methods that are expected to be present in this class. The one that we're interested in here is the launch method that gets invoked when the user actually launches the application. And what you see first of all, that it's creating an instance of this history-oriented page session, which kind of maintains a stack of the various different pages that you visited. And then it's invoking an instance of the application, or creating an instance of the application class here, which is stored in this class or this file here, and it's passing in the history-oriented page session and the host, which is the add-in host class, which is built into Media Center and provides a way of invoking methods in Media Center to pop up dialogues, for example. So once it's created this instance of the application class, it calls the GoToMenu method on it. So let's go to that now. The application class derives from a built-in class called ModelItem that's built into Media Center. It does various things, such as allowing you to fire properties and have properties, and fire events when properties change, things like that. The constructor that gets invoked is this application constructor here, which simply stores away the parameters, and then it's invoking the GoToMenu method we saw a moment ago. This creates an array of properties. There's actually only one property that's being stored, which is referenced to the instance of this class, the application class. And then it invokes a method on the session built-in object to go to this particular page, this Media Center markup page called menu, passing in the properties. So at this point we jump to the Media Center code, or the markup, specifically to this menu markup file. So I'm going to pop into that now. So this is Media Center markup, and it on the very top of it we have various different namespaces identifying various things that are referenced inside this Media Center markup language file. We have a namespace A, which references the assembly that contains the application class that we were just looking at, and we have these other two namespaces that reference various different other Media Center markup language files that are stored in a resource file. And then finally we have this common object runtime, which refers to the standard system library in the common language runtime. There are various different sections to MCML user interface element, which is the kind of the building block in Media Center markup. There's the properties, and in this case here we have the properties, which kind of properties is a bit of a misnomer. It's kind of I guess it's the properties that can be set on the default on this UI instance. I kind of think of them as being parameters. We saw that the application parameter was being passed in that dictionary before this page was being displayed, and so the type is the application type in the assembly, whose namespace is A, which is the assembly up here, and then the name of the property or the parameter is application, and here we're specifying its default value, and basically there is no default value. This is a special value that says it's required. In other words, it has to be passed in. You can also see that there's a second parameter or property, background color, and it's actually got a default value which is stored away in the MCML file that's referenced with this S namespace. And if I just pop that open just so you can see, so it's referring to the background color. Here you can see that it's actually black. So I'm going to go back now to the MCML file we're looking at. So that's the properties section. Here we have the content section, which actually defines the user interface that's being displayed, and we have this is actually a very straightforward user interface. We have a color fill, which is basically saying this is an area to be filled in with color, and its color is the color that's being displayed is the background color, which is the actually by putting it in these square brackets is referring to the property, background color property. And inside this colored area we have a repeater, which is, if you're familiar with active server pages, it's a similar kind of concept. Basically you specify kind of a template that gets repeated over and over again with various values of some kind of a source, that an array, for example, which is an array in this case here. You'll see that the repeater has as its source the myData member on the application class. It's basically saying it's going to be flowing down, so vertically, and it's the content that's being repeated over and over again is a reference to this repeat item, which is stored, if I go back up, in the R namespace, or referred to by the R namespace, which is this repeat item item there. So it's repeats an instance of that, which we'll look at in a second, and it's basically passing two parameters: the text, which is the string that's in the repeated item, which comes from this data source, and it's actually being cast, like ping means cast, into the string class in the one instance of the string class in the common object runtime. And we have a second parameter, which is the application parameter, which is referring to the application that was actually passed in as a property to this class, to this user interface item. So before I go into this repeated item, I just want to look at the my data source. If I go to the, actually I can go to it up here, the application. You can see that this is the public property it's referring to, and we've essentially got a string, an array of 4 strings. So the repeated item is basically going to be repeated first with alpha, bravo, Charlie, and then delta. So that's that data source here. So it's repeating an instance of this repeat item. So let's look and see what this repeat item is. So I mentioned before, when we looked at the menu, that we saw that the user interface had properties and it had content. Well, here we have an example where it actually has 2 other things as well. We have a locals section and a rules section. The local sections is what I think of as being kind of local variables, essentially. So here we've got a local variable called myCommand, which is an instance of the command type. And the command type is basically something that can be invoked, and we'll see how that gets used later. We also have a rules section, and the rules section basically, as the name suggests, it kind of defines various rules. And what we're saying here is that we have a binding between the text, which is being passed in as a parameter, so that's the string from the data source, and it's defining or setting the description property on this myCommand object, and as we'll see in a moment. Well, actually, you can see it here. It's here. So the command type has a description property which is being set to the text that's being passed in. And we're also saying that when the invoked event gets fired on the myCommand object, we want to invoke the dialog test method on the application object that was passed in as a parameter. And we're passing a single parameter, which is this str clicked text, and that's actually the value that's being passed there is the text parameter that was passed into the when this was instantiated by the menu item. So again, it'll be various items from that data source. So what does dialog test do? Well, let's go to the dialog test method. It's just up here, and basically, as you can see, it's got the parameter which is the click text, and it basically pops up a menu item saying that this has been, I guess, displaying the text of the item that was clicked. Now we've got one final level to go to. This repeat item, as you can see, or just down here, we can see that the content section actually just refers to a button, and it passes in this name, which we're calling button, and a model parameter, which is the command object that was being kind of defined up here. So the command object, so the button, when the button gets clicked, the invoked event is going to be fired on the command object, which is going to then invoke the dialog test method on the application object. So let's go and look at this button, which is the last of the classes, or last of the Media Center markup files. So again, we have these various different sections that I referred to before. We have the properties section that define essentially parameters being passed in, so the user interface. We have locals, which define local variables, rules, which are kind of rules that set things or invoke things based on other things changing, and then we have the content that actually defines the user interface. So the parameters that are passed into this button, the only one that's actually required is the model parameter, which is actually a reference to that command object, the myCommand object. that was passed in the repeater, and we have a couple of, or three other parameters that are kind of various different colors that all have defaults, so I'm just not going to talk about those. We have the local variables here, which we have just one thing, which is a click handler, which is used by when the button is clicked. We have quite a few rules here. I'm not going to go into all of them. I guess the one that's interesting here, or there's I guess two that are interesting here. There's the they're all interesting, but these are the two that are kind of salient anyway. We're defining the description on the model object here. We're going to say, which is the one that's passed in. We're saying that we're going to take which is the command, which was set up in the repeater. We're going to take the description, which will be the string that was one of the strings in the data source, and we're going to apply that to the content property of the label object, which we'll see in a moment is the text that's defined further down. And we also say that we're also going to assign the command object that was passed in to the command property of the clicker. So that's what causes the clicked event to be fired, or the command event to be fired when the user clicks on the button. We have various different properties being set on the accessibility related properties being set, so people with poor eyesight can understand what's happening. We have a rule here that says that when the clicking value on the clicker object is true, then we want to invoke, or we want to set the background colors of the. We want to set the background of or the background that's defined further down. We're going to set its color to be one of the various different colors that are passed in, and we're going to say that when the input object has focus, we're going to set the color of the background to a different color to the my color focus, and these both the my color focus and the my selected color are both passed in up here as parameters to the button. And then finally we come down to the content, and the content is kind of very straightforward. Again, we have a color fill area, which is this background object that's whose content, whose color is being set up here and up here. And it's kind of surprising, at least it's surprising to me when I first started playing around with Media Center, that there are actually very few primitive kind of graphics objects. There's no button object, for example, so this whole class is actually kind of creating a button. So we have the background color, and then we have one element, which is a text element, whose name is label, and that's actually what gets displayed, which will essentially be set by the repeated items data source. So let's just quickly summarize what's happening here. We have the launch file, which has that add-in object that gets instantiated and invoked when the user starts up your application inside Media Center, and that's calling a method, or that's instantiating a method in this application class. So it's instantiating the application class, then it's invoking a method in that application class, and that method navigates to the menu, Media Center markup language page. That page has a repeater in it whose data source is one of the properties on the application class object, and it repeats this repeat item. This repeat item has a command object built into it, and when the command object is invoked, it invokes a method. The repeat item has a rule that invokes the method on the application object, which pops up a dialog, or message box I should say. And this repeat item has as its content and this button, which basically simulates a button, or kind of does a button with some text. So how about actually building and running this now? So that's what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to modify it to show you how I modified it to create my BBC radio player. So first of all, I'm going to build this. Actually, before I do that, well, I've done it already, but I'm going to first of all go to the properties of the project. I don't actually know why this happens. I suspect it's because I'm using Visual Studio 2008 and the template was created for 2005 and possibly something gets set wrongly. But anyway, I'm going to go down to the signing section here and I'm going to say that my project is going to be signed, and I'll sign it with a new key file. I'm going to call it MCBeeb, and the password is going to be test. So this will strongly sign my assembly, and that will enable it to be put into the GAC. So I'm going to rebuild this now. Now, I don't know if you remember at the very beginning when we looked at this registration XML file, we saw that there was a template here, or sorry, a placeholder here for the public key token. So what I need to do is find out the public key from the assembly that's just been built. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm just going to I just want to get the path into my copy buffer, so I'm going to copy the path to that. Now I'm going to fire up a command prompt. I'm going to use the Visual Studio's tool to do that, so that I have all the various items I need in my path. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to launch it as administrator. Okay, my home directory is actually on the U drive. I'm going to cd to, and I'm going to paste in the value I copied when I copied the location of this file, just as an easy way of getting there. Okay, now what I want to do is find out the public key, so I'm going to use this command here, debug /MCBeeb, and it pops out the public key token, which I'm going to copy now and paste in here. Instructions on how to do everything I've just done, they kind of go about it a slightly different way, but kind of very detailed instructions are in this README HTML file that gets generated as part of the project. So I'm going to build this again now. Okay, now I'm almost done. They create a batch file for you as part of the template, which is great stuff. Unfortunately, it assumes you've got Visual Studio 2005 installed. I have 2008, so I'm just going to make a couple of changes to this to make sure that it runs properly. It's just a reference to where the GAC tool can be found. It's set up in my path already, so I don't need to specify the full path. So now I've done this, just notice I'm building in debug mode at the moment. So I'm going to now run that batch file that got created for me, and because I'm running in debug mode, I'm going to say /debug. So that's basically registered or copied everything, created directives for me, and registered the application, registered the assembly in the global assembly cache, registered the application inside Media Center. So I'm going to fire up Media Center now. Now you'll see, I think it'll look pretty horrible because of the screen capturing code, screen cast code that I've got at the moment. So I'm going to basically I'm going to go down and change my display to say I want a high contrast color scheme, which I think will make things better for you. Hopefully that's better. So now I'm going back out. You can't hear anything because I've got my headphones on. I hadn't actually thought about how I'm going to show you the BBC playing. Maybe I'll just have to take my word for it. But anyway, I'm going to go down now to the online media, which is where I'll find program library. And here we have the MCBeeb that I just built, including the description I said. So I'm going to run that now. So here we have, this is the display that was created. You see it's vertically aligned and with the various different items from the data source, and if I click on one, you'll see it says button selected. So that's the built-in. So I've not actually written any code there at all. As you'll notice, I've just kind of configured a couple of things, but that's the default framework application that gets created for you. What I want to do now is show you how you can modify that application to to play BBC radio stations, and I think I'll do that in a separate screencast that I'll fire up in a second. So bye for now, and hopefully you'll listen to the next one.